All right, let's talk episode 2 of The Penguin. Now, The Penguin is the latest show to be coming out. Actually, latest. It's one of the first shows to be coming out of this new DC regime. And to be fair, this has been a show that's been in development for a long time, so it's not like it's coming out specifically from James Gunn. This is really purely from the mind of Matt Reeves and his universe. But after the success of the Batman movie with Robert Pattinson, we were going to be getting a couple spin-off shows from that universe, and The Penguin was going to be the first one. So the first episode came out last week, and I just thought, look, it's not the kind of show that I typically seek out. It's definitely not. I'm not generally the biggest, fan of these crime mafia kind of dramas, but I would be lying if I told you, and you can go check out last week's episode of the podcast, that I would be lying if I said anything other than I thought the first episode was incredible in so many different ways. And you can, again, go check out the last week's podcast episode, or the last segment that we did about Penguin episode 1. But we're here to talk about Penguin episode 2. I know just by nature of how these segments and the podcasts are released that it'll be coming out actually pretty close to episode 3. So hopefully this will be just sort of a big refresher, if you will, of episode 2 before we head into episode 3. And hopefully that'll be helpful for you guys as well. So let's talk episode 2 of The Penguin. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion. If you have not seen the episode ahead of episode 3 that's coming out very soon, make sure to just save this video to watch it later, and then come back once you've seen episode 2. And let's get into it. I've taken notes as usual, and I have a lot of things to say, as just like with the other episode of The Penguin. So I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing here in this second episode is I don't know if it's an attempt to humanize Sophia Falcone, but it's definitely an attempt to give us a better understanding of her mental, what's going on in her head, her mental state, I guess, or simply the kinds of experiences that she had to go through in Arkham that shaped who and how she is as a person now. So you have obviously her experiences with Arkham, in general, but then you also, which are hinted at towards the beginning in this, I guess, therapy scene or this sort of flashback sequence that she's experiencing at the very beginning of the episode. But then you also have the trauma of simply losing her brother, who it seems like she was very close to, Alberto Falcone. And I think those two things, because in the first episode, what I think was really interesting is that we got a very cold, very calculating version of this character, Sophia Falcone. But episode 2 starts immediately with peeling back the layers just a little bit. And I think that that's interesting. I wonder how far we're going to go. And by the end of the episode, we get sort of the fully realized version of this character's arc, and that she's going to try to topple her own family hierarchy and become the kingpin at the top, which mirrors Oz's trajectory, or the trajectory that he wants to ascend to with the gang war that's going on here. So I think that's really interesting. And I'd be curious to see how they dive into Sophia Falcone's psyche a little bit more as we head on in, to the series. Because it is true that she's gone through some very traumatic things, even though she is, in essence, a serial killer, just a kind of a mob boss, or an aspiring mob boss, and she's done some really crazy, terrible things. But again, like I said last week, one of the things that I wanted to see in a show like this, where we're dealing with characters that are generally villainous and generally very despicable, is not necessarily sympathy for them, but more just understanding what they're doing and how they're going about it. So I think that is also really interesting there. Then we have more of Penguin just causing a mess, because at the end of episode 1, we saw that Penguin Oz blamed the death of Alberto Falcone on the Maronis. And so we have a direct continuation of that here, where he heads back to talk to Clancy Brown's Sal Maroni, and he is basically saying, look, take the blame for it, and I'll give you what you want, which is messing up that drop that the Falcones were going to go get, which the Penguin also told the Falcones, I believe in episode 1, that he was going to deliver for them. So it's all this back and forth where he being Oz, the Penguin, is in the middle of, but he obviously is not in a position to tell either side, and we'll talk about what I think is going to be going on, or sort of the consequences of his plans as we move along through the episode, because I think this is a big part of what this show is Oz telling one side of the gang war, the Falcones, for example, one thing, and then going back to the Maronis and telling them the exact opposite thing, and then blaming the other side for what he allegedly said. And it just goes back and forth. It's such a rich premise that leads to such chaos. and such a high wire act that I think is such great tension and really good, well-written television. So I think that that's interesting. Then we get a scene here with Sophia Falcone as she is talking to other members of her family, and then Penguin tries to talk to her and says, look, I'll be there for you, you know? And that's, you know, adding on top of what I was saying earlier, that's another really dangerous game to be playing, because Sophia Falcone, I think it's interesting that she, at this point in the show, doesn't really suspect Oz, although maybe she has been the whole time. I'm sure that in the back of her mind, some alarm bells are going off every time she talks to Oz. So maybe part of the, skipping ahead to the very end, part of the reason that she wants him to be a part of her operation is just to keep him close. Not sure, but, you know, either way, it's inevitable she's going to find out sooner rather than later what Oz has been up to. And it's a dangerous, dangerous game, what Oz is doing. You know, trying to play Sophia Falcone, and I think that that's definitely something to keep an eye out for. We get a scene here where Oz is talking with you know, some of his friends here, female and male alike. Obviously, just trying to keep the channel more on the appropriate side, so not going to go into too much detail here. Although I will say the cilantro joke that he says, where Vic forgets to take out the cilantro in the tacos, I think it was, or the food that they were eating, was really funny to me, because I am one of those people. Just like Oz, I guess that's one thing, hopefully one of the only things that Oz and I have in common, is that cilantro tastes like soap to me as well. So I think the joke where he says, "Are you kidding me? Do you want this entire plate of food to taste like soap?" I thought actually was quite funny. I don't know if any of you guys also thought or understood what was going on there, because I know that a lot of people love cilantro. Anyways, not to talk about cilantro for the rest of the episode, but I just wanted to point that out as something that was funny for me. And so, on that note of Vic, I continue to be very impressed with the fact that I am buying more into this sub storyline of Vic and Oz training. I don't want to call him a protege, because I think Vic at this point in the show doesn't want to be Penguin's protege. I mean, the things that he's had to do and the reluctance and the failures that he has gone through. At this point, what are his options, right? He can't leave because he knows about Penguin's entire operation. And so if he leaves, he's dead. And he knows that. And I think that I just continue to be impressed with this dynamic, because it's not something that I thought I'd wanted. You know, I would never have told you before this Penguin show, oh, I want Penguin to be walking around with a young adult man, training him to be, you know, part of his operation. I would have been like, I don't know if that's a great idea. Feels like it would be kind of fillery or dragging down the show, but it shows so much of a different side of Oz. It reveals a side to him that I think deep down wants to impress upon people the kinds of lessons that he's learned, and maybe that's a part of his own insecurities as well, with his own traumatic family upbringing as well. And I think that is a storyline that I'm continuing to be impressed by with every scene that Vic is in. Also, just the humanity that a character like Vic brings to the show, with how scared he is and the stutter and the understandable inability to commit crimes when that's not what what he's known. It's just something. It's the life that he's been living with Oz thus far. So then we get a scene where Sophia confronts a detective that used to work for Carmine Falcone. Again, another really interesting detail to flesh out the world of this Batman universe, where apparently half of the force was under Carmine Falcone's payroll. Again, very interesting. And yeah, I mean, the investigation work, it makes total sense. We got to figure out who this inside man is. It's obviously Oz, but we got to figure it out. And Sophia just trying to get to the bottom of this, it creates more and more tension, right? Because now, whether or not we like it, at least for me, I'm rooting for Oz to get out of it, but also knowing that he's going to totally going to be caught at a certain point. And that's a dangerous game. And it just, the tension is continuing to ratchet up here. So anyways, going back to Vic, we also get a scene where Vic gets a text from somebody asking if he's okay. And that is something that I want the show to continue to explore, because it's something that I had been thinking about as well, of wondering, is there anyone out there for Vic who really cares about him and is wondering where he's been all this time, because he's been gone for quite a while. And so I think that I wonder what that will turn into. 50-50 for me right now as to whether he makes it out of the show, which would be really tragic if he didn't. Really just such a tragic ending for that character. But I'm hoping that he also gets to see whoever it is that he wants to see, whether it's his family, a loved one, because I think that a character like this, just to keep getting berated by Oz and other people. I mean, Oz isn't berating him, although that scene in the graveyard was kind of brutal, but just living a life that I don't think he wants to live, is something that I hope that he can get some semblance of peace there. Anyways, Oz is also in possession of some incriminating photos of Johnny Vitti. So that's another interesting thing that comes into play later on. That's how he gets out of a little bit of a jam with the Maronis. Very interesting. He also visits his mother. So not only fleshing out Sophia Falcone and her traumatic upbringing, or not upbringing, but her trauma, but also talking about Oz. Apparently his mother's condition is not doing so. She's not doing so well. And I think that that's also something that will be playing a big role in some of the motivations of Penguin, because it looks like part of the reason that he's doing what he's doing is for his mother. And whether or not you think that's messed up or not, because obviously their dynamic is kind of messed up based on what we saw in episode 1, it's still something where it is a motivation for this character, and I think that it will continue to pay off as we go along here. Again, just another way for this show to create more dimensionality to characters that just didn't have any. I mean, if you had told me all the things that we'd be learning about Oz in, when I went to see the Batman for the first time, I would just be so amazed and kind of in disbelief, because that character that we see in the Batman is really compelling in his own way. He's a sidekick, to Carmine Falcone, but all these things that we're learning about him it's incredible. And he gives a little bit more of this backstory to Sophia Falcone at the funeral, although part of me wonders how much of this he's making up and how much of it is true. What he says is really tragic about his brothers dying and his mother being in such grief, but I do wonder, how much of this is fabricated and how much of this is manipulation, right? So that he can get in the good graces of Sophia Falcone, which again I mentioned is a very, very dangerous game to be playing. So there is that. We then get a scene where basically the Maronis find out that he basically screwed up the whole operation with the truck and everything like that. And so then, he also, the fact that one of their guys is missing because the detective found one of the Maronis. Or I guess I should back up a little bit, because what happens first is that the detective finds the Maroni and he holds him hostage. And then we have the scene, I think, with the truck and with the failed drop. And then we get the scene. I could be wrong. I could have those events in slightly different order. But just talking about generally the sequence of events here, where Oz is in trouble with the Maronis. And then he pulls out that incriminating information about Luca, or about Johnny Vitti having, cheating with Luca's wife. And I think that, again, my question here is really, and this is not a question about the show's quality, more just about the story, but it continues to be a dangerous game, and I just wonder how much longer can Oz talk and scheme his way out of things, because every single time he does it, and he does it one more time in a very grand way at the end of this episode, where he kills the Maroni guy, and you go, I mean, who and what is happening? Who is not going to be upset about this? And maybe that's the point. That is the point, right? Where he is continuing to escalate the Falcones and the Maronis' angst and anger towards one another. But at a certain point, he's going to be found out, and as he continues to escalate these plots, it's going to be worse and worse and worse and worse for him. And I'm sure that is the point at the end, but I'd be super curious to see, once he is found out, because I think that is an inevitability, what he's going to do to get out of all of this, because right now he is playing such a high wire act, and he's barely getting out of these situations. It's so tense, which is what I love about this kind of show, is the tension that is building every single scene, because you know that he could be caught at any moment, and he is caught in certain moments, but how does he get out of those situations? Like at the end of episode 1, how did he get out of that? And then here, when he's talking to the Maroni woman, and she's interrogating him, it's like, how is he going to get out of that? So it's just really great to see how, just how the writers are manipulating these characters and making them go in different directions that make total and complete sense. Then we go back to the Falcone house, and Sophia. By the way, Sophia having to watch videos of her and her brother is just a crazy thing. It must have been so traumatic and triggering for her, and I just can't imagine that. Even for a normal person, let alone Sophia Falcone. So it's that was kind of a scene where I felt that a little bit. It was a really sad thing. And then we get the scene where Oz, because Vic fails to plant the jewels in the car, Oz has to then kill the Maroni. And it wasn't as shocking maybe as some of the things that happened in episode 1, but it was certainly another moment where I went, well, this show just completely surprised me one more time, because now I guess we're escalating the gang war, but also Oz, how is he just going to keep getting away with this? Eventually, the bill comes due, and the also even later on, that guy getting framed where he has the knife that Oz has, and Oz plants the knife on him. I thought for sure it would have been Johnny Vitti who would have gotten killed, but it turns out to be the other guy. And I'm sure that, Oz, because Oz doesn't seem to like Johnny Vitti very much, and so I'm sure that there will be some kind of confrontation there. But the ending as well, where Sophia calls him, and who knows how suspicious Sophia Falcone is of Oz in this particular moment. I'm sure that her suspicions are getting larger and larger, but how much she knows and how much she's suspecting remains to be seen. It's a very I think under the surface, what we're not seeing is that Sophia is also playing a game here, and I'm sure that she knows a lot more than she's letting on. And that last line too about "Let's dance," what that Oz says to Sophia as she offers him a place in her empire, I think is such a great callback to that backstory that he was telling her about dancing with his mom after his brothers died. So again, another episode that just continues to surprise me and captivate me in a way that I just was not expecting from a show like this, because all these different storylines that are going on continue to ratchet up the stakes and ratchet up the tension for a character like Oz, who, yes, is continuing to get out of it somehow. By the end of the episode, he is still somehow vaguely in the good graces of the Falcones and the Maronis. Not really. He's somewhat in the poor graces of both, I suppose, but not enough to be considered a suspect. But the bill has to come due, and I'm so curious to hear and to find out when and where that will happen, because it's gonna happen, and I'm just so interested to find out. It continues to be such a captivating show, and I can't wait for episode 3. So guys, what did you think about The Penguin episode 2? Let me know in the comments down below. Did you think it was better than episode 1, on par, worse? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to continue the discussion there.